What's up, everybody? Welcome to the privacy stream for Study GRC. I'm Dwight. This is Chris. And today we're going to be talking about consent. We have talked about all these issues with personal privacy. We talked about 23andMe. We talked about Apple AirTags getting an update. And then we went right off into dark patterns. But this week we want to dial it back a little bit just to talk about one of the pillars of privacy. We want to talk about consent with you today. So we're going to be going through a little presentation and then maybe follow it up with some articles at the end to make sure you understand the concept of consent a little bit more, uh, what's the word, Chris?
Yeah, a
Better.
little bit more clearly, and then just get you thinking a little bit more about some of the different aspects of it too. So yeah, thank you for everybody tuning in. We are going to go maybe a little bit quicker here, but definitely keep in mind we're going to put all of the links and some other resources in the description. Drop your comments, questions, anything else in the comments below. You can also catch us out on Discord too. So let's go ahead and get dug into this. So like Dwight stated, we're going to go through consent and kind of like the U.S. privacy aspect here. And so one of the biggest things here is, what does consent actually mean? What is the definition? Like, what are we even talking about?
Yeah, I think in passing we kind of know consent and what it means in general. But yeah, I wanted to say earlier, I wanted to say, yeah, we want to get familiar with consent a little bit more in depth. And I think the GDPR definition of consent is a good way to do that. So it defines consent as informed, specific, freely given, as well as unambiguous. Here we've added on revocable, meaning that you can revoke that consent at any time. But that is going to give us a much more specific definition of consent and give us an idea of what to look for when we do talk about issues such as how genetic data is used or whether or not something is a dark pattern. When we want to decide that, a lot of times we're going to come back and look at this like, oh, does the user give their consent with full knowledge of how you're going to use it? Is it fully informed? Is it specific to how it's going to be used? Like, what is the purpose of use, and did you tell the user that?
Yeah, that's an absolute great way to explain it. And like I said, we'll provide resources to it too, and drop your questions and so forth. But that's a great overview of what consent really comes down to. And we're going to dig into it a little bit more here too. So, like the importance of consent. So, like number one, individual protection. So does ensuring that the user maintains like control over their personal data, do they have the right to revoke that or delete the data, or what data is actually shared and to whom?
A lot of these laws, you see an issue called portability. Like, can I take this information over to a new company? Am I stuck with your company? So a lot of laws require you to be able to provide that data so they can then take it to another provider and still have the same access to their information.
Yeah, and a massive thing here too is so trust building, brand reputation. This, I think, is a massive part of it. How does the consumers, the end user, view you and your company's reputation, your service? When you're more upfront, we'll talk a little bit about transparency later on too, but just making it clear on what data you're collecting, who it's going to. Is it just vendors? Are you selling it? What data is it? And then we'll talk a little bit more about like some of the different tongles and providing options to on particular types of data. And then of course we also have this legal compliance too to meet regulatory requirements.
Yeah, from a business perspective, you might see this in a different order. A lot of times it's
Yeah.
like, compliance, we just need to get it done, and your individual protections might be kind of down there at the bottom. So I think this is definitely from a user perspective, or maybe ideally of, in that one, two, three order, but not necessarily the way you see it at work.
Not a priority. Yeah, this isn't in priority order. All of them, I would say, are equally. And then here we have like consent landscape. So the main purpose of this here is just to display that a lot of this consent requirements and so forth comes down, in the United States at least, comes down to individual states to make that up. What are the requirements? what do they have to follow, and so forth, and then also really weeds out some of the definitions and so forth. And again, we'll leave these links in the description so you could take a look at your state and what might they have.
Yeah, what's not included here, there may be some sector specific laws and things as well. For example, HIPAA would govern any sort of protected health information. So keep that in mind as well. But really, I feel like one of the most overwhelming things about privacy in the U.S. is we do have this patchwork of laws, and so trying to get your mind around how opt-in and opt-out is handled in all these different states and what it requires can really be tough, especially if you're coming from that sort of security background where you didn't really have to know all that, you know. So yeah, just
Exactly.
keep that in mind. Keep in mind also that you're going to have a different breach notification law for every state. So, um, yeah, consent is one thing, but when we talk about the consequences of the U.S. not having a comprehensive law that protects us over all the states and kind of keeps things consistent, this is kind of what you deal with as a privacy professional. And I'd love to make sure people know that sort of going in if they're considering digging into privacy a little bit deeper.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes this industry a lot more complicated, and especially for somebody who's not already in it, trying to understand. Okay, well, does this apply to me? Does this not apply to me? Where do I find this information? Because that city, county, state, federal levels, and so forth, and each one could be different. And trying to navigate that, and like you said, also based even on industry and sector, that plays a huge part in it too. And then here we have like the power of consent. Why does it really matter? We talked a little bit about this earlier too. And so did you want to go top down from here?
I would probably for me the most important one is probably the reduced legal risk. I feel like in previous episodes we have talked about FTC enforcements. We've talked about Epic Games, the parent company for Fortnite, getting fined for those dark patterns. So really, making sure that we're we're understanding consent and making sure that we have these assessments in place and some sort of practices in place where we have to brush up against the legal team or the product or UX team and really ensure that we're embedding those privacy principles into our products is the biggest thing, because that's going to keep us from uh, being on the chopping block for the FTC, or even for laws like CCPA, CPRA, where you see a private right of action gives individuals the right to sue companies who misuse their data.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good part to focus on to begin with, because then that flows into the next stages on increased trust, enhanced transparency, and then even potentially data quality. And that's kind of the visual aid here. So it all starts with reducing that risk,
Yeah, and
especially from that organizational.
those are
Mhm.
really big company goals. And yeah, as a privacy professional or a GRC professional that has some privacy responsibilities, you are going to need to be collaborative about it. Even all the way up to number one. I could see you having to get linked with, your company's data scientists when this particular issue comes up, or you really need to know how consent is handled for a particular application of what you're doing. So um, yeah, those are pretty big goals.
Yeah, and then also a large portion of this is to just get everybody thinking more about some of the different stuff in this realm. And so here's some of the most common consent mistakes. So like lack of clarity, pre-selection options, limited user control, and lack of review. Do any of these in particular stand out to you?
I feel like the pre-selected options is going to be a big no-no. So whether we're talking about cookie policies or just indicating that users have already read these long forms, whether they're privacy policies or anything else, are just that's definitely um, pretty much a dark pattern in a lot of cases. And lack of clarity, I think, as well, when we talk about privacy policies. Like if it if your policy has come straight from legal and hasn't been edited to be understandable right away, can we really say that people are informed and that they are able to look at that policy and know the specific uses, the specific purposes of, and whether or not you sell or share that data pretty accurately. So how we how we format that, and it can be in dense language in your internal policy, but at least on your website and where you interact with the public, it does need to be understandable for people.
And that's where you get that legalese and more technical terminology that the average user and user is not going to quite comprehend. And then also like lack of review here too. Just like a lot of other things in the organization, you want to go through and have a proper review process. Every 6 months we're going to go through and we're going to take a look at how are we asking for consent? How is this handled? Do we have a process for revoking that consent and just reviewing it against the industry standards, best practices, what's out there?
Yeah, and I can share an example of that from the workplace. A lot of times when you're filling out a privacy impact assessment, and a lot of companies don't have this automated. They're not using a GRC tool or something to handle that, so it may not pop up as a risk, or it may not pop up that you need to update another policy. But let's say we're implementing a new feature to our app, and all of a sudden we're collecting more data than we were previously. Well, something should be triggered to let you know that, oh, now I need to update my privacy policy. Maybe now I need to update my terms of service. And so if you're not sort of tapped into this going on, or your assessment doesn't sort of indicate that, then that can really easily be looked over, and you could risk being in a situation where you're collecting data and haven't informed people in advance.
Yeah, most certainly. And then here we have some of the different principles, control principles, and so forth on data collection and so forth. Just a lot of this is just get you thinking a little bit more about it. So we have like data minimization, transparency, purpose limitation. And then you also see down there too, so like data portability that was mentioned earlier and opt-out options. And there's
Yeah.
also like access and correction, the right to view and fix personal data. So this is a lot of the different things that to be considering and looking into.
And yeah, we'll definitely talk about this more in depth in the future. But let us know if you have any questions.
Yeah, definitely drop your questions or any other comments down below. And so we're going to actually go ahead and move over to a couple different examples too. So let's go ahead and pull this up. So this is again, we'll have all the links down in the description. But so this is a report from the IAPP regarding guides for getting consent, and they have some amazing examples in here. So like one of the very first ones here is consent informed if the user has to click another button to understand what they are agreeing to?
Yeah, because I
You
think
know,
a lot of times when they do this, they're almost betting on you not clicking on that. Just like, okay, whatever. Let me get to whatever trinket or whatever I need to buy.
exactly. And then we have a couple other examples here too. So like this is another one. So like one of the key things is specific if the user has to guess what features might not work if they don't consent.
Yeah.
So like they're adding not only technical wording in here, I would say, about cookies and browsers, but it's also saying, however, some features and services may not function properly if your cookies are disabled.
Yeah, you should tell people pretty specifically if possible. And yeah, this isn't necessarily like we talked previously about deceptive patterns or dark patterns. This isn't necessarily that, but I think this guide is great just to give you like best practices. Like always specify when possible, like what people are going to be missing out on, so they can be informed.
I think yeah, I feel like this really follows underneath just being clear and concise, transparent about
Transparent,
what
yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
transparency and clarity regarding that. And there's a lot of really good information in this report. We highly recommend you to check this out. But this is just giving you some different examples. So like on this one here, who are these companies? Can I trust them? What happens if I opt in or out? So be specific and informed. can be tricky. Don't sacrifice one in the name of another.
Yeah, getting both of those in there can be tough, but I feel like if you know if you clear with your design team and they kind of know like you know privacy by design or just really their obligations according to the specific law, then they're used to making you know making things work in a way that can really benefit users.
Yeah. And then we also have this one too. So unambiguous, is consent unambiguous if the very terms you use to collect are ambiguous? For example,
Things
like
like
things like, yeah. So that's also where a lot of this, um, you might not think about it from that perspective at first, but that's why going back and like review process is so important, I feel.
yeah,
For example, or equals.
yep.
And then here's like some examples of like opt-ins too. So another thing that I've personally seen is like a accept button being red and a cancel button being, not, like blended in with the background color or otherwise too, as far as like design practices go. And so there's a lot of different examples in here. Definitely take a look at this. And then there's also this other really good article here too that I'm going to go ahead and pull up. So did you want to go ahead and just mention a little bit about this, the swipe right on data privacy and what
Yeah,
they're
sure. This is a, Fast Company article. I think it's just a fun concept. We wanted to point it out today because it has a privacy professional giving his perspective. It's a guy who has handled privacy for a lot of dating apps, you know, including like Tinder and things like that. And he's talking about these familiar user interfaces. People are always they're familiar with swiping left, swiping right on people that they you know that
Yeah.
they like or want to connect with and things like that. So why not take a familiar interface like that and use it as a way to make sure people are informed about consent? So are you okay with us using this data that you've given us for our AI model, and then instead of checking that you read this huge form, you're instead giving your consent by swiping left or right? So it's pretty, I think it's pretty unambiguous that you know they can't just say like, oh, you didn't answer anything, or you they can't just assume that you have consented to it. Like it's a pretty specific action that you have to take.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting thing for them to recommend or just throw out there. Really, I think that makes it a lot more engaging too, and might get more people involved with actually going through and having that selection.
Yeah,
But yeah,
it's not
definitely check
now.
out.
I was gonna say,
Yeah, go
like,
ahead.
of course, it's not gonna be a cure all. All of a sudden, like you fully understand, all magically fully understand all your rights just because everything's been in a swipe left, swipe right format. But I do think it's a fun and interesting way to kind of present it to people better.
Most certainly. Yeah. So again, take a look at the descriptions that we or the links that we have down in the description. Go ahead and put your questions, comments, concerns, anything else down in the comments. Let us know what you guys think. Is there anything that you want to learn more about? What do you want to see us doing coming up? And then thank you so much for tuning in. So we'll see you guys next week on Tuesday.
Big thanks.
Thank
See y'all
you.
soon.